السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله حسين حسين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi and to Sayyid Ali Raza Rizvi. Thank you so much for appearing on today's podcast. Our topic today is on reforming the community. And in this series, we've looked at different types of reform in different episodes from Abu Abdullah's mission and how the individual can try to seek active growth and change in their lifestyle, whether it's their heart or their spirit or their soul, or in general, the entire community and the world. Today's episode is on the community itself. How do we form collective steps to learn from Abu Abdullah and improve based entirely on his mission, on his message? That stand he took on the day of Ashura, how does it affect us today as a community? And this goes back to the issue of reform again, and how we re-understand this word in a much larger and wider capacity for the community. So with respect, I'll start with you, inshallah, Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi. First, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you so much for accepting for the podcast.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It's a pleasure to be in this program. When we talk about the concept of reform, I think it's important even to look at the meaning of it. The whole idea of reform. So you have a form and then you have reform. That only is applicable when there is deformation. And that's very important to keep in mind. And that's where we have to look at this issue, especially in the context of the various ideological, challenges that we see within the Muslim community, and to some extent, even among the Shia intellectuals of our time, that we have to define that where is deformation? Is it in the faith in Islam itself, or is it in the community and the ummah? And that's where we go back to Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, that when he uttered those words actually in a written form, when he wrote the wasiyat that he left with his brother Muhammad Hanafiya, where he says very clearly that my purpose is only one, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي, that I have risen to seek reformation in the ummah of my grandfather. It's not that Islam is a religion by itself deformed. It was the ummah which actually went away from the right path. The deformation has happened within the ummah, and Hussein ibn Ali says, my objective is to reform the ummah, bring the ummah back to line so that they be closer to Islam. And I think that idea is very important to have some clarity about it. Otherwise, we will go into the same path that we saw the Christian churches, especially in Europe and North America, have gone in this path of reformation. So I think the message of Hussein ibn Ali is very clear, that we need to reform the ummah. The ummah is the one which needs the reformation, not the pure faith the way it is.
Thank you so much, Said. Your camera has just gone, just so you know. Now it's back. Please continue.
Yeah. So I think the example of the Christian churches, especially in the West, is very important for us to keep in mind, that there are pitfalls when we talk about reform without defining what do we want to reform. We are not questioning the process of ijtihad. We are not saying that the fatwa of the mujtahideen cannot be changed. No, that process is alive in the Shia world, in the Shia jurisprudence. But when it comes to the core values of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Masumeen, when people start to say, well, some of the ayat of Quran, we need to suspend them, just because the ideas are not in sync with the values of the secular liberal society of the West. Whether it is to do with family life, it has to do the definition of family. We are talking about the laws of inheritance and many other things. And so I would really have a problem when I see this deviation in the name of reformation. where now Quran is to be reformed. When we say some of the ayat of Quran are to be suspended. And unfortunately, this is not only in the West, you know, this kind of ideas, although in a minority. You know, when I hear some people saying that, you know, the Universal Charter of Human Rights by the United Nations should be the document. Everything else has to be in sync with that. So we had a belief all the time that whenever we want to see something is right or wrong, we go back to the Quran. Quran becomes the criterion for us. But now we are being told that no, if there are ideas in the Quran which do not, you know, are not in line with the Universal Charter of Human Rights, then we need to maybe suspend those ayat of Quran. And so, yes, reformation was the purpose of Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, but the reformation was of the ummah which had deviated from the path of Islam, not to change Islam itself, to suit the current liberal secular views. I'll conclude my statement here.
Thank you, Said, so much. To Said Ali Raza, the same question, but now we have a good framework to work with, which is there is Islam and its sources, and then there's the Ummah. And deformation maybe occurs in the Ummah itself, not in the sources themselves. Is this what was happening at the time of Abu Abdullah when he said this statement, when he wrote it? Was that the environment at the time then? And how do we learn from that now, do you think?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would like to, first of all, acknowledge and endorse Hujjat Islam Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi's theory of reform. If we look at the time of Abu Abdullah Hussain alayhi salam, the greatest problem was that people had again forsaken Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And the likes of Yazid were muckering the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. They had sidelined the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And today again, we need the same reform that Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam performed, that we need to make Quran the limelight and the most significant part and role in our lives with the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, where the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam very clearly said in Hadith Thaqalain that I'm leaving behind two very things. Inni tarikun fikum thaqalain, kitab Allahi wa itrati Ahlul Bayt. Ma in tamassaktum bihima lan tadillu ba'di abada. Innahuma lan yaftariqa hatta yarada alayhi al-hawd. So I'm leaving behind two weighty things, the Quran, the Book of Allah, and my household, the Ahlul Bayt. If you hold on to them, you will not go astray. They will not leave each other until they meet me at the pond of Kauthar. So the reform is in Ummah. Now, the Ummah may bring in many deviances amongst themselves. I can count very quickly a few. So sometimes socially, we have deviated from the Islamic concept of society, where Imam Sadiq al-Islam very clearly says that each and every one of you should be able to take help from each other, or even without consent, use the necessary means from each other, because that is the concept of Ummah. So socially, we do need a reform. Secondly, our Muslim politicians are quite corrupt. Amir al-Mu'mineen gives a very clear guideline. The political reform requires justice, and today we do not see justice in the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim rulers. I can go into a lot more detail. I'm just trying to touch, just the core of the different reforms that we may need. Now, the third reform we need is educational reform. So we do see many religions, many societies, many different educational systems, but we don't see a standardized education system where the national curriculums and also the Islamic studies should be introduced to the children, the Muslim children, at an early age. So I do feel that we require an educational reform. The fourth reform that is required is economical reform. Now, Islam is against certain things, which is usury. Second is taking advantage of people's needs. We have seen during the pandemic where oxygen was needed in many Muslim countries, people were selling oxygen at a very high price. So we do need a lot of reforms where people realize what it means to be a Muslim, or what an Islamic society or Islamic economic means. Can we take advantage of people's needs? And unfortunately, we do see in many Muslim countries, if not all, but in most Muslim countries, the capitalist societies have taken over, and the people who have the wealth, they are completely destroying the structure of the Muslim economy. So there are many reforms required. But we must realize that these reforms are not to change the teachings of the Quran, not to change the teachings of Hadith, but to reinforce the Quranic teachings and the teachings of the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimu salatu wasalam. Lastly, before I conclude, I would like to say that there will be many other reforms. We need to go back to the time of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we need to go back to the time of Ahlul Bayt and see what they really want from us. Sometimes people say that you are taking us back in time. Well, we are not against technology and we are not against moving forward. What we are against is that we must not try and reform things like other religions have. So there's a whole concept of Jewish Reform Society and the Christian Reform Society and the Hindu Reform Society. And we are hearing similar things amongst Muslims who want to reform and change, let's say, the prayers, the methodology, the Friday prayers and other systems, judiciary. I think we need to realize that ijtihad, the door of ijtihad is open, and our fuqaha are not people who are unqualified. They are very highly intellectual. Yes, we may require certain reforms, but all of those reforms have to be acknowledged and endorsed by the right channels and not by individuals who do not have deep understanding or any understanding of Quran, Hadith, of the Ahlul Bayt.
Alhamdulillah, I think there's been a very strong appreciation for the use of the sources in any reform, and it should come from Quran and Ahlul Bayt in the way that's intended. And this is why I'm glad that we mentioned Marja'iyya as well as the vehicle for the right type of change when needed in our community. But I'd like to draw attention to one point which both of you made. And Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, I'll come to you, inshallah. Your camera is still frozen for just a moment. So if you adjust it, we'll be able to see you, inshallah. But the question is related to our current world today. So Sayyid Ali Raza, you mentioned the area of capitalism and economic oppression. And earlier, Sayyid, you mentioned secularism. And these are common issues that we have today. And there's a debate right now happening in the world where it's how does a Muslim live in this system around us using our sources? What role does Quran play and Ahlul Bayt play in how we interact with these other ideologies which are not Islamic? My question to you is, how is Imam Hussein relevant to that debate? How do we bring in Abu Abdullah for this discussion about balancing ideologies and being true to the original intended Islam? How does he help us today? And if you could just adjust your camera, alhamdulillah, I can see you. How would you answer that question?
Okay, is the camera working now?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I think when we talk about looking at Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam as an example for reformation during our own time in a secular capitalist society, especially in the western part of the world, I think we had to accept the reality that we are a minority in this part of the world. So we cannot always, live according to the ideal Islamic, lifestyle that we always aspire. But I think it's important to look at some of the basic values that Islam has brought forth to the world. And many of these are of universal nature. So it would apply in a Muslim society as well as in a non-Muslim society. And when we talk about reformation, especially from the perspective of Hussein ibn Ali, I think I'll just take one example. And nobody would have any argument about the idea of it. Sanctity of a life of a Muslim or a human being in general. I don't think there are any two people in the world who have a problem with that. But look at the Ummah. What is going on? The Muslims who are being killed at the moment in different countries, whether it's in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, or Syria, or to some extent in some areas in Iraq, the majority of the victims who are Muslims, and they are being killed by fellow Muslims. Where is that concept, the very basic concept of human life, sanctity of a human life? If we cannot even revive that value, that if somebody disagree with your perspective, you're going to kill him. You know, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the Hajj that he went, I think the narrator was Abu Dhar, if I don't make a mistake there. The Prophet looked at the Kaaba and he said, Kaaba, your hurmat is your sanctity, your sanctity is very high. However, you have to realize, hurmatul mu'min a'awam. But the hurmat and sanctity of a mu'min is higher than the Kaaba. If something happens to Kaaba today, the whole Muslim world will rise. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is saying that sanctity of a mu'min is higher than the sanctity of the Kaaba. And yet it's the Muslims who are actually not hesitating in killing this whole, culture of violence, promoted by Taliban and ISIS. Unfortunately, all of them go back to this idea of Salafism in the worst form of it. And this is where we have to realize that when we talk about, reformation, I think there is a need, especially even for the Muslims who live in the Western part of the world, to look at the very basic values and try to, emphasize that. Because I can never forget that statement by a young Pakistani university student. They had a presentation, mock parliament in Lahore, in Punjab. And I saw the clip of that where the student says, even the malaikas are confused. They see that, the person who is pulling the trigger is saying Allahu Akbar. And the person who is being killed, he also ends up saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah when he's dying. So what's going on? And and this is where I think when we talk about reformation, we are talking about really deep in our hearts, we need to go back and look at the core values of Islam. And this is where the issue of, implementing justice on a social level comes in, starting with the life of a Muslim, property, and, and of course, in a Western culture, we'll be talking about the life of a human being. And the idea of justice would be the main idea which will even resonate with many non-Muslims in this part of the world when we talk about it. As Hujjatul Islam Maulana Sayyid Ali Raza talked about this concept of justice on a social level, as far as one of the objectives of the reformation that we should be looking for.
So let's expand on that exact point then. The violence we have between Muslims that Sayyid Muhammad, as you mentioned, happens under the rulership of Muslim leaders, like you introduced before, Sayyid Rizvi. Like there are Muslim leaders who are allowed to instruct war from one Muslim country to another. My question is, how do we allow this to happen? Because Abu Abdullah is an Islamic figure for all Muslims. He's a grandson of the Holy Prophet. His mission has been there throughout history. And yet when we hold Muslim leaders to account today, they are not being reformed with the example of Abu Abdullah being held against them. So my question is, how do we use Imam Hussein to keep these people accountable for what they have done to us?
Hussein ibn Ali becomes a symbol that if you see an unjust ruler and a tyrant, you have to speak. He becomes an example for reformation required now in the Muslim countries against these tyrant rulers. There is no process of, democracy, whether it is Islamic or not, that's a different issue. And this is where, for example, in the initial meeting that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had with the cavalry force of Hur, after the Zohar prayer, Hussein ibn Ali took the opportunity to speak to them and give a short khutbah where he narrates his grandfather's statement. He says, Man ra'a sultanan ja'iran, whoever sees a tyrant ruler who is going against the rights of the people, against the laws of the Quran and the Sunnah, changing everything. And if a person who observes that situation, if he doesn't do anything in action or words, so he's even given different levels of, protest there. If a person doesn't do anything, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have a right on the day of judgment to place that indifferent person alongside the tyrant ruler. And so Hussein ibn Ali's voice is still there, asking the ummah that, okay, you have these rulers who are actually going against the Islamic values. You are not allowed to be silent the way I have spoken against Yazid. Of course, his status was very high. The level of responsibility of Hussein ibn Ali was greater. And that's why he decided to go through that level of sacrifice to awaken the slumbering conscience of the ummah at that time.
I said, Said Rizvi, same question. The one who has Abu Abdullah, they cannot be silent to the oppressed, to the tyrant, as Sayyid has mentioned. So when we speak, what do we now say to the tyrant when we have Abu Abdullah with us?
Yeah, very important point Sayyid has raised here. I would just like to probably add a few, if I probably can. If you look at the history, the Holy Quran very clearly says about Pharaoh that he humiliated his people and they obeyed him because of the fear of his humiliation that he performed for them. So if they did not obey him, he would kill them, he would humiliate them further. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when talking about those people, he says, إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ. Indeed, those people were unjust. Those people were fasiq. So not only Pharaoh is bad, not only Pharaoh is evil, but even the people who obeyed him because of his tyranny and him and accompanied him or endorsed him were also fasiq, unjust. So it is very important that Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salatu wasalam, he could have stayed in Medina and accepted the allegiance of Yazid, and nothing would have happened to him or his family. But because as an imam and because of the social justice that he has been sent to establish by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when the tyrant directly came and imposed upon him to pay allegiance to him, to do bai'at to him, he stood up and he said, "Mithli la yubayi'u mithla." Someone like me will never pay allegiance to someone like him. So sometimes we cannot rise, but we can still raise voices. Sometimes we cannot have the powers to write or to do the jihad of the pen, or do the jihad of the speech, or do the jihad of, we don't have the means, but we still do have the power to at least oppose and not submit to the oppression. And that oppression does not necessarily mean that we, living in these countries, we want to establish Islamic states. That's not what we are here for. So what we need to at least do is address that wherever there is oppression, because many of our powerful countries can make a difference. And they can, when they speak out, stop some certain injustices. And that's what we need to do. One of the other things that I feel that about Abdullah Hussain alayhi salam, with his family, with his small group of people, when he rose, he made certain points. He gave speeches throughout, he wrote letters throughout his journey from Medina to Karbala. And if you look at some of the people that came and saw him, met him, they all made certain points. And that when you go to Iraq, you will be killed. He said, yes, I know. Now, how is he significant today? So he teaches us a few lessons. Number one, do not unnecessarily make challenges and put yourself, your family, and your society, your community into danger. And unfortunately, we see in the form of different political movements, especially today in Afghanistan and certain groups in Pakistan and other countries, in Syria, in Iraq, in Sudan, in many countries, unfortunately, Nigeria, where groups are rising and in the name of Islam, they are causing trouble. They are causing mischief. And unfortunately, they're using the name of Islam. So the Imam al-Islam, although he spent 10 years under the government of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and then a part of it under, but then he only rose and spoke when Yazid said, you either give your head or you pay allegiance. That's only when he said, no, I will not let it come to that. Secondly, when he did decide that, yes, it is time that I need to speak out or give my life, even that had many conditions. There is no contradiction between the life of Hussein ibn Ali والسلام, and Ali ibn Abi Talib or Hassan al-Mujtaba والسلام, or Imam Sajjad al-Islam. Now, Imam Sajjad al-Islam has seen and is the greatest inheritor of the courage of Abu Abdullah Hussein. But his methodology is different to the methodology of Abu Abdullah Hussein in the sense that the requirements are different. So his lifestyle is not contradictory to the lifestyle of Abu Abdullah Hussein. It is exactly in accordance with the lifestyle of Abu Abdullah Hussein. But the requirements of his time are different. I do not wish to go more into it rather than confusing my listeners with different aspects of the lives of the different Imams. The point I'm trying to make is that we need to see what our circumstances are. And in every circumstances, Sayyidul Shuhada Imam Hussain alayhi salam's message is to always be against oppression, whether be it in society or at home, in our personal life, or anywhere else. And that's the biggest message that I have personally taken from the life of Abu Abdullah Hussain.
Thank you so much, Sayyid Ali Rizvi. You have given me so many ideas, but I have to summarize them into one question, which I will do now for you, Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, which is this. If the Imams have different approaches, like has been mentioned, there is something called a Husseini approach. Like it is something which we discuss a lot and we try to understand. And there's certainly standing against oppression is a key part of it and the methodology which we take if the conditions are right. Something Sayyid mentioned is that we are not in this country in the West to make Islamic states. We're not here to do that. The question then is, if we have this Husseini approach, what are we here to do with it? What is its function in a Western society for us?
I think I'll just extend the discussion that my brother had on this issue. I would just zero down on the life of Hussein ibn Ali himself. His imamat was not for 1 year. When Muawiyah died, that's when Yazid came in, and in 1 year, Imam was killed. But after the shahadat of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, Hussein ibn Ali lived for 10 years under the reign of Muawiyah. Why didn't he take the step at that time? So if you're looking for Husseini approach is not a single approach. This is where you have to look at the circumstances. 10 years he didn't do what he did in few months. Rather, in few weeks, he started this process when Yazid comes to power. Everything goes back to circumstances. You know, and I would even, you know, relate it to the peace treaty of Imam Hassan bin Ali alayhi salam with Muawiyah. And if I may put it this way, that what Imam Hussein alayhi salam did was not something against the strategy of his brother Hassan bin Ali alayhi salam. Rather, it was actually a continuation of the process. Because as long as a single condition of that truce or peace treaty, whatever you want to call it, was still intact, Hussein ibn Ali respected it. The final, you know, condition was violated when Muawiyah practically appointed Yazid as his successor, and that actually took place when Muawiyah died. Now, all the conditions of that peace treaty between Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Muawiyah had been destroyed. And that's where Hussein takes his first step. So you cannot even separate the sulh and the peace approach of Hassan from the movement of Hussein ibn Ali. Many people, you know, differentiate between the strategy of two brothers. No, they're all connected. That is an outcome of what was done by Hassan ibn Ali. Once those conditions were totally, actively violated with Yazid coming to power, that's when Hussein ibn Ali took his first step. And so that diversity of methods with single purpose, that is what we have to keep in mind. That the purpose is always one, to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be on the side of haqq, to promote social, justice in society. But our circumstances would demand us to adapt different strategies. And that is where we see. So we cannot say the Imams who came after the third Imam were not following Husseini line or Husseini, stand. They were all Husseini in their own circumstances. And so that diversity in the method of that movement has to be kept in mind.
This is a beautiful realization because it shows us the beautiful consistency of Ali Muhammad, that the origin is always the same. And although the conditions change and the manifestation of the activity changes, the aim is always the same, no matter who the Imam is. And like you mentioned, the resources are the same. And each time an Imam comes, we see another side of that beauty. And I guess it's an honor for us to listen to these views. We have an Imam today, of course, as well, who embodies those same principles of the Imam of our time. So question for you, Sayyid Ali Raza Rizvi, which is, how does our Imam expect us to view Abu Abdullah for our conditions today? Because if conditions keep changing over different generations, we have an environment today where we have to use Imam Hussein in a certain way. How does our Imam want us to view his grandfather?
It's a very important question. Before I answer that question, I want to just very quickly touch upon this concept. I remember I was translating for Ayatollah Sistani, and one of the Zahirin asked him a question and said, what does Sahib Zaman ﷺ have that the Holy Prophet ﷺ did not have, or Ali ibn Abi Talib ﷺ did not have, or Imam Hassan ﷺ, or Imam Hussain ﷺ did not have, that they could not establish a peace and justice on earth, and they could not form the entire world into one Islamic government, and the 12th Imam al-Islam will be able to. So when I posed the question to Ayatollah Sistani from this brother Zahir into Farsi, and he replied, he said, there is nothing that the 12th Imam Islam has that the Holy Prophet ﷺ, or Ali ibn Talib ﷺ, or Imam Hassan ﷺ, or Imam Hassan ﷺ, or any of the Imams did not have. They did not lack anything. The Holy Prophet ﷺ did not lack anything. It was a society that lacked obedience, the understanding, the intellectual capacity that the people will have in the time of 12th Imam. It is the intellectual capacity that the people in Abu Abdullah Hussain al-Islam's time did not have. Today, our duty to 12th Imam is, and that's how he wants us to perceive Abu Abdullah Hussain, that we raise the intellectual level of our people. And today, people are intellectually so high that they, even if they do not become Muslims, they still appreciate Imam Hussain al-Islam's legacy. They appreciate his movement. They appreciate his policies and his contribution to the society, not only in that time, but even today. Now, many times when we're introducing Imam Hussain al-Islam, we need to be very careful in the group of people we are speaking to, and what is their intellectual level, and then are they Muslims, non-Muslims, Shias or Sunnis or other religions, or even people without faith? What aspect of Imam Hussain's life should we be addressing to those people? I think we need to be very careful in the selection of our concepts, because sometimes it is our wording that may give the wrong concept of Abu Abdullah Hussain to the people. One of the last thing that I want to say before I conclude, many of the scholars in contemporary history, when doing research on 12th Imam and the institutions that say that these are specialization on 12th Imam Islam, they say that in the end of the time, before the Zuhur, there will only be two camps. One will be the camp of third, and all people of all faiths will be either Hussaini or Yazidi. And many non-Muslims will also become Hussaini at the arrival of Prophet Imam. And they will announce that they were Hussaini, but they did not realize that who is Hussain of this age. So we need to understand that the 12th Imam wants us to understand that he is the Hussain of our age. And when he reappears, like Marhum Ayatollah Bahjat had said, Sheikh Muhammad Taqi Bahjat said, that he will announce a few times his coming, and he will say, Allah ya Ahl al-Alam, O people of the world, Inna Jaddi al-Hussain qataluhu atshan. So when he will repeat these words, it was my grandfather, Hussain, who was killed thirsty, or he was killed. He'll repeat those sentences a few times, because it will be Ashura when he comes. So he wants us to introduce Imam Hussain and also introduce the one who inherits, or the one who is truly Hussain of this age, and that's Imam Mahdi. He wants people to understand that he is the Hussain of this age and no one else.
Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, same question. Your camera is just frozen for a quick second. But because the 12th was mentioned, and because Sayyid Sistani was mentioned, these are the topics which I have learned so much from you. How would you address that same question? What face of the Imam do we show to non-Muslims to fulfill our responsibility to him and to the Dhuhr of the 12th Imam, do you think?
Well, I think, if you look at the tragedy of Karbala and whatever happened in that one day, it's amazing that it was just one day, the day of Ashura, but it is a universal paradigm for us. Whatever you want to talk about, which is important to human society, you will see an example there. So there are many, many, aspects of this movement of Imam Hussain salam which can be shared and which will become very relevant. You look at the issue of racism, which is now a very burning topic in the West, especially in the United States of America, as well as in Canada. You know, you talk about the Afro-American community over there. In Canada, this injustice done against the indigenous people, you know, these graves being found of the children who were forcefully taken from the indigenous families to basically to change them, civilize them according to the Christian norms and, you know, thinking. As well as in Europe and in UK also, these issues are there. And if you look at the community, a small community of helpers of Hussein, Ashab of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you see a very rich mixture there, ethnic-wise, language-wise, color-wise, social, financial status, rich and poor, master and slave, white and black, from all different, diversity that we see in that part of the world. And that itself shows that, you know, they were united in the same struggle. And we call them Ashab of Hussein. We don't say it was black or white or rich or poor or Arab or Ajam. No. And I think this is one area where even our Shia communities, Ummah, has to be reformed, you know, to deal with this racism that we see even within. And so when you talk about non-Muslims, these are issues common to be discussed within and even outside our community. And that's what I would say, just to, you know, extend the statement of our brother Maulana Ali Raza Rizvi, that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, in one of the last stages of his struggle, made a statement which is so powerful that he was speaking not only to Muslims. When he says to Shimr and Umar ibn Sa'ad, it's a whole story, I don't want to go into the background of it, but when he says the words, إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ دِينٌ وَلَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادِ, if you don't have a religion, and if you don't have fear of the day of judgment, كُونُوا أَحْرَارًا لِدُنْيَاكُمْ, at least be free for the sake of your world. So even if you're an atheist, a secularist who doesn't believe in God, there would be some principles and values that you should hold on to, where he was actually saying, don't take my women and children while I'm alone, I'm alive, you know, come and fight me. And this is where we, and this is a living message of Hussein ibn Ali, applicable even now. You look at any war situation in the world, whether it is in the African continent, in the Middle East, in Muslim countries, in Bosnia, or any part of the world, you will see that the women and children who have nothing to do with all these conflicts, they become the target. And so what Hussein ibn Ali was saying at that time has a universal impact and a universal message for everyone we can share with people.
What this makes us realize now, and I'm glad that I realized, I hope the viewers have realized, is if there are deformations in our community, there are things which are taking away our freedom, our true freedom. And whether it's racism or indigenous suffering or global oppression, reformation just means to make yourself free again and to undo that which was done before you, to realize the truth and the seeking the truth. And this realization is good because it means all of the listeners can look for examples in their lives of where they are not free in the way to worship Allah or to do their ibadah and to do their responsibility. And any example of leaving that subjugation and going towards progress is itself a type of reformation. So this is connecting your first point to this most recent point, Sayyid Muhammad. So I'm glad we could make that jump. I want to have the last question because I know we have to end. But both of you have mentioned reforming in the right way. And the topic of al-Maraji came up as the people who are qualified and whose role it is to guide this ummah. And I know both of you have taken such extensive leadership roles in the community to represent the Maraji, to speak for them or to relate their messages for us. And we are, I don't know how I'm saying we for the whole community, but everyone is so grateful for this. You are the best people to answer this question, which is, when it comes to Reformation, how close are the Maraji to the community? You know, what that distance between the ulama who are guiding us and we who are being guided, how close is this link? And I'll start with you, Said Ali Raza, and then we can end with Said Muhammad Rizvi. For you first, Said Ali Raza, how close is that link between the Maraji and we who wish to be reformed?
It's a very good question. And because we have seen from first hand our experience with our teachers and with our meetings with many of the Maraji, many times our community thinks that they don't know what the world is about, what the Western world is about. They will be surprised to see the amount of knowledge that our Maraji have about the different governments, about the different systems are being run, about the history of the different countries, about the needs of the people in different countries. And I was, in the last few years, posed by this question by many people living in the West, that they haven't come to the West, so they don't know what we go through for them to issue fatwas. And I have always given this answer along the lines that if you believe that they have to experience what you're going through for them to be able to give you the cure, you're saying that a doctor must have cancer for him or her to give the cure for cancer, or they must have the illness for them to be able to find a cure. It requires research, it requires dedication and expertise for the doctor or physician or any expert to find the cure, and not experience the illness itself. I have, especially with some of the Maraji, I can mention at Sistani that there was a Western professional who was very highly read, and he was accompanying us in a group, and he asked a question about certain issues, and he himself said that I have a lot of research on European history. And when Ayatollah Sistani started explaining to him the developments during Second World War and after, that same lecturer said to me that I was amazed at the amount of knowledge that Ayatollah Sistani posed on the Western history, post and past the Second World War. And he said, I am really, during the translation that you were doing for me, he said, I was thinking, is it Ayatollah Sistani who has written these books on history and given to the Westerners? Or has he read all the books on the history of Australia, the colonization, the Second World War? So sometimes people think that, these people sitting in Najaf and maybe just elderly ulama who are just 80 and 90-year-old. But the amount of study and the amount of research and the memory these great scholars have amaze me each time I meet them and each time I speak to them at length or translate for them or translate their works into English. It amazes me to see the amount of research or the selection of words and the selection of terminology and the selection of the criteria they go through before issuing a fatwa or providing a research. And so I would say that these scholars, not all, but most and some of them are extremely outstanding, that if they came to any part of the world, no matter how great a researcher was, would submit and bow down to them and salute them and admit to that these scholars, these ayatollahs, some of these Maraji are outstanding in every form of research.
Said Hamza, same question.
Well, I think one of the important issues that we have to keep in mind is that, the ulama on the ground, the scholars who work with the community, especially in the Western part of the world, are an important link in a sense of not only taking our problems from this part of the world to the Maraji and to present them over there, for them to look at the situations and come up with solutions based on the Islamic, resources. But they also, have this duty of becoming the ambassadors for the messages and the views of the Maraji on the ground to explain how this is to be implemented. And so it's actually, that is a very important link, the ulama on the ground. When it comes to the issue of, whether they are capable of guiding us or not, again, I would just, echo the words of our brother, that those who go and meet them, actually they are able to, they are able to realize that the impression that they had before was not really the correct, image that they had. Is the screen frozen there for me? Or is it clear now?
Screen is still frozen. If you just adjust it for a second, we will see it. Yeah, you're back now. See it now.
Okay. So I'll just, just extend the conversation that he had with Ayatollah Sistani in a meeting that I had, and I was actually alone with him in one of the visits. It was amazing to hear about, he was talking about how he spends his day. And one of the things he mentioned to me that my wakil in Beirut has a standing order that any book about Muslims in any part of the world outside the Arab world, which is translated into Arabic from foreign languages, buy it and send it to me. Don't wait for its reviews to come in the journals or newspapers. So he's actually actively reading, even now in this age, spending time on this. One of our colleagues from US was telling me that he actually was studying those days. This is the early days when the Americans occupied Iraq, and monitoring as the administrators and this and that. He specially studied the society of Germany and Japan. And I was thinking, why would he select these two? Then in my mind, I came to realize, okay, these were the two countries defeated by the Allied forces. But today, Germany and Japan both have come up very strong. Their economic power, their influence on the world political scene. And probably he was looking at, what they have done. Now that we are under the administrative control of US, he was probably trying to see, how do we come out, as a nation here in Iraq after this situation. And so he keeps himself very up to date on these issues. And when it comes to the, reform within the community, he is very much keen on this issue, although sometimes when things become very sensitive on a community level, he feels the pain. And sometimes he says, please don't ask me anymore on that particular issue, because he says, if I say anything, you are not going to follow. That is a fatherly figure trying to express his, I would say, anger in a polite manner. And don't ask me, because if I say something, you are not going to follow. And so they are there, and whenever they identify issues which need to be changed and reformed, they will speak their mind and guide the community accordingly.
So reform then, when it reaches the community level and the global level, cannot be done alone. And the community needs guidance, it needs advice, and it needs to follow the line of the Ahlul Bayt and of the Quran. And today it's the ulama, it's the maraji, as we have heard from two esteemed guests who speak with real authority on this matter. It's our scholars and our maraji who know and who give us that guidance. And the reason why is because the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, the sources, are the very thing we are trying to return to. And any deformation in the ummah after that time is the thing we are reversing, just to go back to our origin, which is Ahlul Bayt, which is Quran. And scholars help us to travel that journey. But more than just scholars, in this episode we have discussed the various forms of deformation we need to change. So whether it's racism, whether it's Muslims attacking Muslims and the abrogation of the sanctity of life, whether it's the oppression that we face in our countries and other countries and in the past as well, all these things have been allowed to happen in the vacuum left by abandoning the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. So reformation is to go back, it's to remember, and it's to undo. But for us, it's not just retrospective or nostalgic, it's something which is progressive and revolutionary, because we have an Imam of our time for whom we are reforming all of these things for, and in his name and for his sake. And I hope the part which all of us take from this discussion is your Imam, who lives and breathes right now, demands of you and I to view Abu Abdullah as a figure for this growth, for this reform. He expects us to learn from this message in a very practical way. And I hope and pray, inshallah, that from the benefit of these great scholars we have just listened to, alhamdulillah, we have the honor of fulfilling that mission for our Imam, and for the sake of all those who are waiting for his call.